All right, so today we're diving into a really interesting topic, a cluster of earthquakes that hit Surrey, England back in 2018, 2019. And you don't really think of England as earthquake country, right?
No, not really.
Yeah.
Especially Surrey. It's not on a major fault line or anything.
Right. But over 100 earthquakes hit this area in a pretty short time span. People were reporting, furniture shaking, cracks appearing in walls, even like a loud bang and impact kind of sound.
Crazy.
Yeah, it definitely got people's attention. I mean, imagine feeling the ground shake beneath your feet in a place where it's unheard of. Talk about unnerving.
Totally. So the big question became, what was causing these tremors? What was going on beneath the surface? And, there was this one spot that kind of raised some eyebrows right away.
Yeah, the Horsell oil, well, right near the epicenter of the earthquakes. So naturally, some geologists were like, could this be a case of induced seismicity?
Induced seismicity. So like earthquakes caused by human activities.
Exactly. And oil extraction is actually one of the activities that can sometimes trigger these types of tremors. Okay, so how does that work? How could oil drilling actually cause an earthquake?
Well, it all comes down to pressure. Think about it like this. Deep underground, you've got these rock formations,
Yeah.
right? And when you extract oil, you're changing the pressure balance within those formations.
Oh, I see. So it's like if you squeeze a balloon on one end, the other end bulges out because the pressure shifts.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Hmm.
And those pressure changes can sometimes travel far underground, potentially impacting fault lines and triggering earthquakes. So in the Surrey case, some experts were thinking, okay, maybe the oil extraction at Horse Hill is causing those pressure changes that are leading to these tremors.
That makes sense, but I'm guessing it wasn't quite that simple, right? There must have been other factors at play.
Oh, absolutely. Not everyone was convinced that oil extraction was the culprit. Some experts pointed out that the specific pattern of the earthquakes in Surrey, the timing, the distribution, the types of tremors, didn't perfectly match what they'd expect to see with induced seismicity caused by oil extraction.
So it was kind of a scientific debate. Some experts pointing to oil extraction as the likely cause, and others saying, well, hold on a minute, maybe not.
Right. It was a real puzzle, and they needed more evidence to figure out what was really going on.
So what happened next? How did they try to solve this mystery?
Well, a team of researchers from University College London decided to tackle the problem head-on using, get this, computer simulation.
Computer simulation?
Yeah, they wanted to see if they could recreate the earthquake activity in Surrey by modeling the oil extraction at Horse Hill. So they fed all the data they had, the timing and volume of the oil extraction, the geology of the area, into a powerful computer program and ran over 1 million simulations to see what would happen.
1 million? Wow, that's a lot of simulations.
Yeah.
So what did they find out? Did the simulations support the idea that oil extraction was causing the earthquakes?
Well, the results are pretty interesting. They found that their simulations actually aligned very closely with the real earthquake activity in Surrey. It was pretty compelling.
So case closed. They proved it was the oil well.
Well, not so fast. Remember, even with a strong correlation, you can't always assume direct causation.
You mean like just because two things happen around the same time doesn't mean one caused the other?
Right, exactly. It's a classic correlation versus causation problem. And there were some other factors that made it tough to say for sure what was happening in Surrey.
Like what?
Like, for example, they didn't have seismometers in place to record the very early stages of the earthquake activity. They were installed after some of the bigger tremors had already started.
Oh, so they were missing some crucial data from the beginning, like the first few pieces of a puzzle.
Yeah, precisely. And that missing data added a layer of uncertainty to the whole picture.
Okay, so while that UCL study provided some really compelling evidence, they couldn't definitively say, yep, the oil well is 100% the cause.
Right. It was a strong suggestion, a plausible link, but not a slam dunk open and shut case. And this uncertainty is actually a really important part of the story because it highlights the need for caution and careful consideration when dealing with these kinds of complex geological systems.
I can see that. Okay, so we've got this fascinating case study in Surrey. Earthquakes in an unlikely place, a possible link to oil extraction, some compelling evidence, but also some lingering uncertainties. What happened next? Did the earthquakes just stop? What about the oil well? What about the people living in Surrey? Well, we'll get to all that in a minute, but first, let's take a quick break.
This whole situation really brings up that idea of the precautionary principle.
Oh, yeah. The precautionary principle. That's like, what is it again?
Well, basically it means being extra careful when we're dealing with stuff we don't totally understand.
Yeah.
especially when it comes to messing with the earth and stuff like that. Like,
Mm.
it's better to be safe than sorry, especially when you're talking about potentially triggering earthquakes.
Right, right. Okay, so what happened after that study came out? Like with the earthquakes in Surrey and that Horse Hill oil well?
Well, the earthquakes did eventually die down, but the Horse Hill operation actually ended up being halted.
Oh, really? Why? Because of the earthquakes?
Well, not directly. It's kind of interesting, actually. It all went to court, and the Supreme Court actually ruled that the whole project had been approved improperly in the first place.
What? Why?
Well, they said that the initial approval process hadn't properly considered the impact of the oil extraction on climate change.
Ah, okay, so the Horse Hill operation ended up being stopped, but not specifically because of the earthquake concerns, more like the whole environmental impact in general.
Exactly. And that ruling really set a precedent. You know, it made it clear that things like climate change have to be taken seriously when they're evaluating these kinds of projects.
It's interesting how this case brought all these different issues together, right? Like the science of earthquakes, the legal stuff, and then the whole climate change debate.
It really shows how complex this all is.
So the people in Surrey were probably relieved when the earthquakes stopped and that oil operation shut down.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But I bet it was still a pretty unsettling experience for everyone. And I'm guessing it probably made people more aware of this whole issue of induced seismicity, right?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely brought it to the forefront.
So even though things calmed down in Surrey, the story didn't just end there, right? Wasn't there another oil drilling project that popped up nearby?
Yeah, you're right. The one in Balcombe, West Sussex. And that one immediately ran into a lot of opposition, from local residents.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Especially after what happened in Surrey, people were probably pretty on edge about the possibility of more earthquakes, right?
Exactly. And so this time around, there was a lot more focus on what we call preemptive monitoring.
So like trying to figure out the risks before they even start drilling?
Yeah. They were doing a lot more geological surveys, installing seismometers to get a baseline reading of the area's seismic activity, and even using computer models to try and predict how the drilling might affect the underground pressure.
That sounds a lot more responsible. Like they were actually learning from what happened in Surrey.
All right. It definitely shows a shift in thinking.
But even with all those precautions, there's still some level of risk, right? We're still
Yeah.
talking about, messing with stuff deep underground.
That's true. There's always the chance that something unexpected could happen.
So what happened with that Falcom project? Did they end up drilling?
Well, it's still kind of ongoing, actually. It's facing some legal challenges, and it's become a real focal point for a lot of different concerns about, energy, the environment, and public safety.
It sounds like it's a real-time example of how we're trying to figure out this whole balance between our need for energy and, protecting our environment.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a situation to keep an eye on.
So we've talked about the Surrey earthquakes, the Horse Hill oil well, and now this Balcom project. It's a lot to take in. But before we wrap things up, let's shift gears a bit and think about what all of this means for our listener. So, if you live near a place where they were thinking about drilling for oil, would you be worried after hearing all this? About Surrey and Balcom and all that?
Well, it definitely raises some important questions, right?
Yeah. What kind of things should people be thinking about?
Well, I think it all starts with being informed, you know? Don't be afraid to ask questions.
What kind of questions?
Well, first of all, find out about the history of the area. Has there been any earthquake activity there before? What kind of rocks are under the ground? Are there any fault lines nearby? Stuff like that.
Right, so get a good understanding of the geology of the place.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah, and then ask about the drilling operation itself. How deep are they planning on going? What kind of technology are they using? What kind of monitoring systems will they have in place, to detect any tremors or anything like that?
And how likely is it that the drilling could actually cause an earthquake? And if it does, how big could it be? That kind of stuff.
Exactly. Those are all really important questions.
Hmm.
And don't just take the company's word for it. Do your own research, too. Talk to independent experts and get a second opinion,
So it's really about being proactive and not just waiting to see what happens. And it sounds like it's important to talk to other people in the community too, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's strength in numbers, Find out if there are any local groups or organizations that are already looking into this stuff.
I think this whole thing really shows how complicated this issue is, right? We need energy, but we also need to protect the environment and people's safety.
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act.
But I think these cases like Surrey and Balcom, they're forcing us to really think about these issues and how we're going to move forward.
Definitely.
So maybe one of the big takeaways here is that Even though we can't always know for sure what's going to happen underground, we can still make smart choices and try to minimize the risks as much as possible.
Exactly. It's all about being informed and responsible.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today, but hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought, and encouraged you to keep learning about these important issues.
Yeah. Keep asking questions and stay engaged.
Thanks for joining us.